I'm very excited about what I'm going to share with you today. If you haven't heard of him, Peter Sandman is the preeminent risk communications specialist. I went to school for communications. I have my master's in communication from the University of Ottawa. So when I was in school, we studied Peter Sandman. And I'm overjoyed to see that he has come out of retirement just to talk about the coronavirus. Now, why should you listen to Peter Sandman? Because, as I said, he is the best in his field in risk communication. And when something happens, when shit hits the fan, you should listen to this man on how to communicate it to people, because this is all he's studied for his whole career, pretty much. He's also married to Jody Leonard, who is a doctor. You can follow her on Twitter at EIDGeek. She is a former WHO senior pandemic influenza communications advisor. So she knows her stuff about pandemics and risk communication. So imagine the knowledge between Peter Sandman and his wife. And this is all going to come out. I'm going to show you right now an interview that Peter Sandman did with a journalist. Now, unfortunately, the journalist didn't use a lot of his material, so I would like to present it to you in full here, the conversation between him and the journalist. It comes in 5 or so different parts, so this is the first part. The most serious health hazards in our lives: smoking, excessive fat in the diet, insufficient exercise, driving without a seatbelt, etc., are typically characterized by under-response. That is, by apathy rather than panic. This is apparently true even where the list of serious hazards is dominated by war, famine, and infectious diseases instead. Considering how many lives are at stake, the enormous difficulty of warning people gets surprisingly little comment. I want to take 1 minute to comment about that before we go into the interview with Peter Sandman. So he is completely right. It is difficult to warn people. I have a good example specifically about the coronavirus and specifically about someone in Wuhan, here from the New York Times. This article is called "Her Grandmother Got the Coronavirus, Then So Did the Whole Family." It talks about how Ms. Zhang was initially unworried about the outbreak. I'll read this to you. For Ms. Zhang's family, the first signs of trouble emerged in the week leading up to the Lunar New Year, when her 70-year-old grandmother, who was in good health, had developed a fever and started coughing. By then, the new virus had been spreading in the city for weeks, though officials had mostly played it down. And this is what we're seeing on CBC and BBC. They're playing it down. So I just realized that I didn't give an actual example of how the BBC is downplaying this. So I'm giving you one right now. On BBC.com, an article that came out 9 hours ago says, "How deadly is the coronavirus?" And it gives statistics that are accurate from WHO. But then at the end of "how deadly is it," it says, to put this into context, about 1 billion people catch influenza every year, with between 290,000 and 650,000 deaths. The severity of flu changes every year. Do you see what they're doing here? So what they're doing here is they're comparing apples to oranges to try and say, don't worry about this. So they're comparing percentages to numbers, which you can't do. You can't compare percentages to numbers. You have to change one to the other so that you can accurately compare. If they wanted to actually put the coronavirus into context, which is what they're saying that they're doing, then what they would do is they would say 1 billion people catch the influenza with between 290,000 and 650 deaths. To contrast and compare this and put this into context, if 1 billion people caught the coronavirus, 20 million people would die. So you can see when you change it to actual numbers, it's not fairly reassuring, but they're trying to come off as reassuring. Even after the government finally acknowledged that it could be transmitted among people, the family didn't think it was at risk because they spent most of their time indoors. They took her grandmother to a clinic where the doctor prescribed medicine for a cold and sent her home. To contain the outbreak, the government restricted travel in and out of the city, shut down public transportation, and banned most private cars on the road. So at this point in the story, they have Wuhan on lockdown, okay? Like many of her fellow residents, Miss Zhang was at first unworried. The city is on lockdown, and she is, like many others, unworried. She posted memes on social media making light of the lockdown and passed the time by sorting trail mix. The article goes on to say how multiple members of her family are now ill and her grandfather died of the coronavirus. We don't have an update. We don't know how many other members of her family, if her grandmother also died, we don't know. But the point is, she went from being totally unconcerned, even in the middle of a lockdown. As the article goes on, obviously, her grandfather actually dies in her own apartment. So she's intensely concerned. She becomes like panicked, like even yelling at administrative people at the hospital, like, you need to take them in, you need to take them. It's just not understanding initially the threat that was there. And then when it finally happens, panicking because she didn't initially understand the threat. Worry is an important tool that needs to be used. One more example is one that we are all very familiar with, which is the Titanic. You couldn't even get people to go in the lifeboats at first because everything looked normal around them. Why would you want to go on a lifeboat? That seems more dangerous. So, that's another good example. People didn't panic until the ship was tilted like this and they could see that they were in trouble. That's when they panicked. That's when they decided to try to get off. So the point of risk communication is to tell people honestly what is going to happen, what they can expect, so that even if the ship is like this, that people can properly prepare so that when the ship goes like this, they don't start screaming and running amok. They're more prepared. They knew that this was going to happen. So after having said all that, let's finally dive into Peter Sandman's interview with this journalist.
Journalist Faye Flam interviewed risk communication expert Peter M. Sandman on February 9th, 2020, about the coronavirus pandemic to be, now officially known as COVID-19. This is segment 1, Why Worry Now? For the other segments, the complete hour-long interview, or other content on coronavirus risk communication, go to www.psandman.com.
The question of what you should be afraid of now and the question of what you should be worrying about vis-a-vis the short-term future and preparing for are completely different questions. And the answer, if you're in the United States and you haven't been to China in recent weeks, and nobody you're in close contact with has been to China in recent weeks, the answer to the question, what should you be afraid of now, coronavirus is not on the list. The current risk to the average American of coronavirus is negligible. It's not just be more afraid of flu, it's be more afraid of falling down the stairs, be more afraid of taking a bath. There are millions of things more dangerous to you right now than coronavirus. But most of those things are not getting more dangerous day by day at a very fast and accelerating rate. Mm-hmm. And it looks like the coronavirus is. They're not sure of that, and it could burn itself out. It could, things could happen that would make it not something to be worried about. But right now, the people who are saying don't worry about coronavirus because it's not here now. They don't say that about measles. They don't say, they don't say that about retirement.
Yeah.
Worry is about the future. Yes. And it just doesn't make any sense to tell people not to worry about something that is looming as a possible, very serious risk in the not very long-term future. So, the big picture is, of course you shouldn't be worried. You shouldn't be afraid to go out in the street because of coronavirus today. But it's perfectly appropriate to be thinking about, could this get worse? Is this likely to get worse? How would it get worse? And how would it affect my life if it did? So I mean that's, I think that's very straightforward. The the dominant two questions are, is this going to spread widely, and is it going to be severe, or how widely will it spread and how severe will it be, since those are not dichotomous questions. And the experts think they know the answer to the first. They're not certain, but they think they know the answer to the first, and they really, really don't know the answer to the second.
The second being how severe the disease will be for individuals.
How severe it will be. So I mean, virtually all the experts are guessing is too weak, but certain would be too strong. They are pretty, they are betting that it will probably be pandemic. Mm-hmm. And what, as you know, but some of your readers probably don't, pandemic has nothing to do with severity. It has everything to do with something being widespread, in most of the world, if not all of the world, pretty much at the same time. I mean, it can roll from place to place, but it's pretty concentrated in time. It's causing at least some sickness. You don't call it a pandemic if it's totally benign. So it's concentrated in time, it's widespread in space, and it's making a lot of people sick. But how sick has nothing to do with the definition of pandemic.
Okay, right.
So every infectious disease outbreak has a kind of a pyramid. And at the bottom of the pyramid are the people who are infected but asymptomatic. They're infected, but they have absolutely no symptoms. And a little bit higher up on the pyramid are people who are, very mildly symptomatic. So mildly they don't know they're symptomatic. They go to work. They look fine to their friends, but after they get sicker, and you ask them, gee, in the days before you got really sick, did you have any symptoms? They remember that I had a cold, or, I had a little bit of a flu-y feeling, but it wasn't much.
Right.
And then higher up on the pyramid, you have people who have, who know they don't feel very well, but they're still going about their business. And then higher up on the pyramid, you have people who are thinking about going to the doctor because they feel pretty crappy. And then you have people who go to the doctor, and then you have people who have to go to the hospital, and then you have people who go to the ICU, and then you have people who die. Mm-hmm. And as you get higher and higher up that pyramid, there are fewer and fewer people. As you get higher and higher up that pyramid, usually the people are better able to transmit the disease because they're coughing more, they're sneezing more, they're emitting more of the virus. But in a different way, they're less able to transmit the disease because they're not going out. They're feeling crappy. So, eventually the only people they can transmit the disease to is people, there's healthcare workers because they're in the hospital.
Right. It happened in SARS, which made it very scary.
Exactly. And, severe people, severely ill people are transmission risks in hospitals. Mildly ill people are transmission risks, in the world. And what you worry about with the pandemic isn't the severe people, it's the mild people who are going to give it to other people. So you wind up kind of knowing, we don't know this yet, but you wind up with some sense of what percentage of all the people infected are at different points in the pyramid. How many infected people are asymptomatic and never get symptoms? How many, get a little sick? How many get very sick, and so forth? And eventually, how many die.
So you eventually know the shape of the pyramid. We don't know the shape of the pyramid yet. The experts don't know the shape of the pyramid yet. They're doing all their work at the top of the pyramid.
Right. The top, I guess, is a lot more apparent than the bottom, which is pretty hard to know at this stage.
Exactly. And when the top is serious, you're too busy to worry about the bottom. There's nobody in China testing asymptomatic people to see if they're infected. They can't test all the seriously ill people they've got. So they're not about to waste tests and test time on somebody who's asymptomatic. That's an interesting, important question. But, when you're treating sick people, that doesn't become a priority. So we have no idea in China, and we have no idea elsewhere how many mild people are infected. So we don't, but we have every reason to think that most of the people who are infected have not come to anybody's attention.
Right.
Am I with you so far?
Oh, yes. So, in fact, this is all stuff I've been sort of thinking about over the last couple of days, and things that I think have gotten some press in things like Stat News, but not so much in the mainstream press. So it'll be good for me to weigh in on some of this.
So, if what the media need to try to explain to people is it is spreading invisibly. And all the experts are believing that, unless something very surprising happens, it will continue spreading invisibly. And as it spreads more and more invisibly, the whatever percentage it is of people who catch it that get really sick will start to be visible. That happened in China, and it's starting to happen in other places, and it will happen in the places where it hasn't happened yet.
Perfect.